And our third and final main topic today gets submitted to us by Charlotte H. And Charlotte H writes, "Hey, John. Kevin Feige has recently talked about R-rated content and how he is not planning on doing R-rated stuff apart from Deadpool. I don't care what rating Blade gets because MCU has great fight choreography. What do you think? Is this a mistake? If Deadpool can be in the MCU and rated R, why can't Blade? Would love to hear your thoughts." All right, thanks a lot for sending that in. And yeah, this was pretty interesting. So what Charlotte is referring to is that Kevin Feige was just basically asked about R-rated content, Deadpool, you can do other things R-rated. And this is what he said, okay? So this comes to us from Kevin Feige, who says, "I think your question is more adult or R-rated. You know, other than Deadpool, which has already established itself as a certain genre and a certain rating that we've already said we would not mess with when we start working with Deadpool, which we have, other than that, we've not ever encountered a story or a storyline or character's journey that a PG-13 or the tone or the ratings that we've been using up until this point has prevented us. We've never been held back by it. If we ever are, then certainly there could be a discussion to be had now that there are other outlets like Hulu, like Star. But that just hasn't been the case yet. We've been able to tell all the kinds of stories that we've wanted with the tonality and the rating structure that we have now." That comes to us from Kevin Feige. Basically, what Kevin Feige is saying is this. Yes, Deadpool is already completely established. Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool is known as a certain thing, it's done a certain way, and we're not going to mess with that. It's going to stay R-rated. But, Kevin Feige says, we've never been hindered by doing things PG-13. It's never stopped us from being able to tell the stories that we want to tell, and so we have no plans to. Maybe in the future, if we come across something that we need to change things up, we will. Unless that, no thanks. That has rubbed some people the wrong way because obviously what they're implying here is that Blade, which they're already developing, is not something off in the future. They're working on Blade right now. A lot of people are thinking, well, wait a minute. So you're not going to do Blade rated R. Let me get a couple things out of the way here first. First things first. R does not make movies better. R doesn't make movies better or worse. Good movies make movies good, bad movies make movies bad, and then you just attach the rating to it that is ever required. That's required for that movie. But if you get a bad movie, but there's another one where Blade pulls out his wanker and starts, playing with himself.
Hey now.
That's rated R, but that wouldn't make the movie any better. That wouldn't make the movie any better. If you have a really bad movie, but there's one scene where he cuts off a head and instead of not seeing much, you see blood splatter on the camera. Did that make the movie any better? No, that didn't make the movie any better. And by the way, a lot of people think PG-13 is for kids. No, it is not.
No, it is not.
There is a lot of PG-13 stuff that can get pretty edgy. A lot of people remember The Dark Knight, which some people consider very mature. The Dark Knight was PG-13.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. On top of all that, you also have to remember that in movies, you can get away with a lot when it's not humans you're doing things to. Like, remember, in Transformers, there's a scene where literally Optimus Prime is fighting like 6 Decepticons, and he literally holds a Decepticon's head, pops out the sword out of his arm, rips his head off, decapitates him, splits them down the middle, and their bodies fall apart like this. But because they weren't human beings, because they were robots, PG-13. There's a way if you want to do Blade where if you make the vampires look monstrous, TV and movies will let you do a lot to monsters, aliens, and robots with a lot of brutal violence and get away with it. That being said, I will admit, Aaron, that when I think of Blade, I think of R-rated. I think R-rated. And that might be because my point of reference was the Denzel Washington, was the Wesley Snipes version of Blade, right? So that was my previous experience with it. That was a lot of years ago, but that's my previous experience with it. And so when I hear that Kevin Feige is maybe insinuating they're going to do it PG-13, I admit my first thought is, really? But I mean, everything he said, there's been a lot of vampire stuff on TV that is not rated R. There's been a lot of vampire stuff in movies that is not rated R. There is a lot you can get away with from a violence point of view. Even if you don't go rated R, you have to do it a certain way. And look, Kevin Feige's never been wrong. He has never been wrong. It's just that simple. He's never been wrong. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But I get it. My first thought too is Blade rated R. But if Kevin Feige says, look, we have a way to do Blade PG-13, it's going to be hard PG-13, we figured out a way to do it, and it's going to be great, Kevin Feige's earned the benefit of the doubt. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, it's not what I would personally do. I would probably go R with it. But, you know, if Kevin Feige says that we know how to do it and it's going to be great, then until he proves us wrong,
Right.
I think we should give him the benefit of the doubt. But again, I understand some people wanting it the other way because that's the way I was thinking on it too. You hear about this. What do you think about it right now?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that you're saying. And I too, I grew up and saw the first Blade and I believe it was the second Blade, blood raining down from the ceiling,
With the opening rave scene and whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Opening credits of the first one, and a woman's giving head to a guy, in a hallway. And it was a hard R. Well, I would say it was a medium hard R.
Yeah.
It was medium hard R. And so for me, I was like, what do you mean? How are you going to be able to do Blade not being rated R? Especially because, my first thought also is vampires are inherently sexy, sexual creatures. You've never seen an unattractive
Which
vampire.
makes Mahershala Ali kind of a good addition to be playing Blade.
I'm into that in a big way. And so, they're inherently sexual, sexy, gorgeous creatures. I mean, they're biting at the necks of people, so there's always a level of intimacy, a level of sexuality. Werewolves are not sexy. They, all of a sudden, their entire bodies just sprout hair, and they just rip people to death. That's not sexy. So with that, I was like, I don't understand how they're going to do this. But then the more that you look into what made Blade a rated R film, it wasn't the gore necessarily. It was the fact that he said fuck 45 times.
Yeah.
That is a big reason why it was a rated R movie. The woman, performing fellatio, that was part of the reason why it was a rated R movie. And so when we think of PG-13, we also have to look back at the history of it. Do you know who actually came up with PG-13?
No.
Steven Spielberg.
I didn't know that.
And here's why. In the early 80s, it was there was only PG and rated R. And then Temple of Doom and Gremlins came out, and they were both rated PG. But people were, they were both rated PG, and people were like, well, wait a minute, this movie is not appropriate for a 7-year-old. Gremlins is going to scare the shit out of a 10-year-old kid, But if you're 14, you can probably handle it. So Steven Spielberg, who was director of Temple of Doom and was a producer on Gremlins, said, hey, why don't we find a happy medium? Because this movie would be totally appropriate for kids over the age of 13, not under the age of 13, and PG-13 was created. So when you look at that, and then you also look at, the movies that MCU has done, I've never watched an MCU movie and been like, yeah, PG-13 would have been a lot better if they threw more fucks in there. I've never once thought of the rating when I've watched an MCU film. It's just never even occurred to me. So without the frame of reference of the original Blade being an R-rated movie, I wouldn't necessarily go, well, this movie better be rated R. I'm only saying that because I'm comparing it to the previous one.
Right.
And you can actually say the word fuck. In Adventures of Babysitting, PG-13 movie, they say the word fuck twice in the same sentence.
X-Men Days of Future Class, they meet Logan, who says, fuck off, or go fuck yourself, or something like that.
You can use the word fuck if you're not using it in a sexual way.
By the way, you can also only use a certain amount of time. So technically speaking, we in the show have already exceeded the MPA limit for that. So technically today's episode is rated R.
Send in your super chat so we can pay our fines. I don't know if there are fines on YouTube. But anyway, so that's the thing. And then as far as violence goes, PG-13 actually does allow for intense violence. Like, that's okay. The jumping point, the jumping off point, where it goes to R, is it has to be two things. It has to be realistic and extreme or persistent. And that realistic word goes back to what you were saying. You know, if it's got to be realistic, well, in reality, there are no vampires. So realistically, if Blade pulls the throat out of one vampire and throws it in the face of another vampire, which he does in the original Blade, that's actually totally fine for PG-13 rating, because that's not realistic, because vampires don't exist. So I think that what they're going to do, and when they're writing it, they're going to keep the F-bombs to a minimum. They're not going to be having anyone, performing oral sex in the hallway. They're going to be keeping the nudity at, they're not going to have any nudity, which they don't necessarily need for it to be good storytelling, as seen by the entirety of the MCU. And any of the extreme violence, they're going to put it in the direction of vampires, which they would be doing anyway, because Blade is a vampire hunter. So I am on the same page as you and a lot of you out there who said, no, this has to be a rated R movie. It has to be rated R. But after thinking about it, it actually kind of doesn't. And I think that Kevin Feige has more than proven that he knows how to tell a good story without leaning on the R rating. That doesn't mean that they might not film it maybe as a really soft R and maybe have a few scenes that they might release later on. I don't know. I mean, I know that they don't really do that kind of thing, but I have, after thinking about it and reading a little bit more up on PG-13 versus rated R, I think we're going to be fine. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, I think if your movie is in a place that if in order to be good, it has to be R, then you're not very good at making movies.
Right.
If your movie needs to be R. Now, I say that it depends on there will be some exceptions to that, I think. And I think that's why Kevin Feige was quick to point out that, listen, we're not doing a new Deadpool. We're doing a Deadpool that is already current and happening, and it's already established itself as R, as being a certain way. We can't change that. This is, however, a new Blade. This is a brand new Blade that we're doing. Look, the bottom line for me is this. If Kevin Feige had called me, which he does.
Every day.
Every day. He said, Campea, we got to know what you would do. But if Kevin Feige were to have called me and said, hey, John, I'm kind of wavering a bit here. Should we go Blade PG-13 or should we go R, all things considered? I would have told him, go R. Go R. Just throw off any inhibitions. Just that's what I would have told. I would have said go R. But just because I would have said go R, that doesn't mean it can't possibly be fantastic if it's PG-13. That's not true. It can still be fantastic if you go PG-13. Just I would have done it R. And I just think, you know what? I know some people would agree with me that maybe I would have gone R, maybe you would have gone R. But again, getting back to what we said before, Kevin Feige's kind of earned the benefit of the doubt. So let's see him prove us wrong. And we'll see where we go with that.
And it's also a slippery slope for them because, as you said, Deadpool was already an established thing that they then adopted. So they were like, okay, well, we're just going to have to go with whatever we already have on this. And it's popular already. Once Kevin Feige starts saying, hey, we're developing this property, because this is a new Blade. It is not a sequel from the previous ones.
It's a brand new iteration.
A brand new iteration. Once Kevin Feige opens the door to say, okay, we're willing to make rated R MCU movies, it's actually going to take the MCU into a totally new direction. Because then all of a sudden you have audiences that are going to be expecting 45 F-bombs and more sexualized content and violence that is not only extreme and persistent, but also realistic. And so I actually like the fact that he's staying consistent with the brand. And the brand is, we know exactly how many F-bombs we're going to drop. We're not going to go into too sexualized of a territory. And we're going to keep our violence extreme, but not extreme and realistic.
Here's an interesting number to throw to you guys. Okay, jot these down. Here's 3 very interesting numbers for you guys to take. Remember, there were R-rated Blade films, and some people act like those Blade films were massive successes. Massive world-beating successes. You know, like Deadpool, yeah, it made $700 and $800 million. Well, so did Blade. Well, here's the reality, okay? Here's the reality. Blade 1, now granted it's a bit older, but still these numbers are kind of interesting. Blade 1 made a grand total worldwide of $131 million.
Wow.
Blade 2 made a grand total worldwide of $151 million. And Blade 3, which was awful, Blade 3 was awful, but Blade 3 ended up making the exact same amount of money, Blade Trinity, as the first Blade did, $131 million. So
but it launched Ryan Reynolds' career.
But, well, Ryan Reynolds was already around before Blade Trinity.
Okay, I mean, that's a whole other conversation.
That is a whole other conversation.
I completely disagree with you, and I will argue to my death about that. But
Hannibal King, as he was in Blade Trinity. But
they didn't make a lot of money.
The point is, it's not like we're saying, well, Blade, unless you do it just like the old Blade movies where you can't possibly succeed. Well, they didn't really succeed all that well. I mean, now you can make the argument, the unprovable argument of, well, it really gained in popularity after that. And well, yeah, because after the first Blade, the second Blade made more money, but it only made $151 million. The third one only made $131 million. Granted, that was more because that movie was terrible, whereas the first two Blade movies were awesome. I'm just saying, keep in mind that it's not like the previous Blade films were these big, massive successes. The first two were great, but they weren't big, massive successes. They were actually I'm all right, maybe at best. So I can understand why Kevin Feige wouldn't feel this overwhelmingly powerful financial need to, well, we better do it the way it was done before. Well, those only had modest, if any, success.
Yeah.
Whereas Deadpool is making $700 and $800 million. So I don't know. Again, not what I would have done, but it's what Kevin Feige's doing. And hey, you know what? If you say, Kevin Feige, that you've got a way to do it and to make it great, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt for now. And I think that's what we should do. And then we'll see how it goes. And if it's terrible, well, maybe they would have gone R. Anyway, guys, the question is, what do you think about this? It seems that Kevin Feige is implying they're going to do everything they've got going right now. Which one of those things is Blade? Is going to be PG-13. Good idea, bad idea, little bit of a bad idea, major catastrophe destined for failure, bad idea. I don't know. What do you guys think? Jump into the comments section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys. With